The story behind the name of Saint Petersburg begins in the early 18th century with the ambitious vision of Peter the Great. In 1703, the powerful Russian ruler founded a brand new city along the Baltic Sea, determined to transform his nation and open it to the wider world. This city was not just another settlement, it was meant to symbolize the birth of a new Russia, modern and outward-looking. When Peter the Great chose a name for his new city, he called it Saint Petersburg. At first glance, many people assumed that the Tsar simply named the city after himself. However, historical accounts reveal that Peter the Great explained the city was actually dedicated to Saint Peter, the apostle of Jesus Christ. In Christian tradition, Saint Peter holds a uniquely important role. Among the 12 apostles, he is remembered as the one entrusted with leadership. According to the Gospel, Christ declared to him, "You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church." Because of these words, Saint Peter came to symbolize the foundation, stability, and spiritual authority of the Christian church. For Peter the Great, this symbolism carried powerful meaning. The Tsar was determined to reshape Russia into a strong nation. He wanted his country to move beyond isolation and become connected with the scientific and intellectual developments across Europe. By founding a new city near the Baltic Sea, he created a gateway, a place where trade and ideas from the West could enter Russia. Just as the Apostle Peter represented a rock-solid foundation for the church, the city would be the foundation for a transformed Russia. In this way, the name St. Petersburg captured both a spiritual and a national aspiration. Spiritually, it honored the great apostle whose faith and leadership shaped Christian history. Politically, it expressed the Tsar's hope that the city would become the cornerstone of a new era, strong and open to the world. Over time, St. Petersburg grew into one of the most magnificent cities in Europe, a center of culture and political life. Though its name changed during the 20th century, the restoration of its original name revived the memory of its founding inspiration. The name continues to remind us that the city was meant to stand like a rock at the beginning of a new chapter in history. It reflects the strength and leadership associated with the apostle whose name it bears. The story of St. Petersburg begins not with kings or empires, but with a simple fisherman whose life would change the course of history. Long before grand cities rose along the Baltic Sea, there lived a man named St. Peter. He was not a scholar or a ruler. He was an ordinary fisherman, living a quiet life by the shores of the Sea of Galilee. Yet his destiny changed forever when he encountered Jesus Christ. Christ saw something extraordinary in this humble man. He called him to follow him and gave him a new mission that would echo through centuries. According to the Gospel, Jesus spoke powerful words to Peter. "You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church." With those words, the fisherman became the symbolic rock upon which the Christian church would stand. Peter's faith, leadership, and courage would eventually make him one of the most important figures in Christian history. Remembered as the leader of the apostles and the first shepherd of the church, centuries passed after the life of St. Peter, and the world changed dramatically. Kingdoms rose and fell, empires expanded, and new civilizations shaped the course of history. Yet the memory of the apostle, a fisherman who became the rock, remained powerful. Then, in the early 18th century, another Peter emerged on the stage of history. Peter the Great, this ambitious and visionary ruler, dreamed of transforming Russia into a modern and powerful nation. He wanted his country to learn from Europe, to embrace science, art, and trade, and to stand proudly among the great powers. To make this dream a reality, Peter the Great decided to build an entirely new city. In 1703, along the marshy banks of the Baltic Sea, construction began on what would become one of the most remarkable cities. This city was not only meant to be a political center, it was intended to symbolize a new beginning for Russia, a gateway through which new ideas, knowledge, and culture could flow. When the time came to name this new capital, many might have expected the emperor to name it after himself, but instead, he chose a name with a deeper meaning. He called it Saint Petersburg, dedicating it to Saint Peter the Apostle, his patron saint. The choice was rich in symbolism. Just as Saint Peter represented the rock-like foundation of the church, the apostle had once been a humble fisherman, called to greatness by Christ. Now, centuries later, his name would be linked to a city destined for greatness in the world. And indeed, the city fulfilled that destiny. Over time, St. Petersburg grew into one of the most breathtaking capitals in the world, famous for its magnificent architecture, grand palaces, shimmering canals, and vibrant cultural life. It became a center of art, literature, science, and political power, shaping the history of Russia and influencing the world. Thus, the story comes full circle. A humble fisherman called by Christ became the rock of the church. Centuries later, a powerful emperor built a city and named it after that same apostle, a symbol of strength, foundation, and destiny. And that city, born from both faith and vision, would become one of the most dramatic and beautiful capitals the world has ever known. When Peter the Great began building the new city of Saint Petersburg in 1703, he was not simply constructing a political capital. He was laying the foundation for a city that would represent a new chapter in Russia's history, one that combined strength, culture, and deep symbolic meaning. From the very beginning, the buildings chosen for the city revealed that this place would carry not only political power, but also spiritual significance. One of the very first and most important structures built in the young city was the Peter and Paul Fortress, rising from the marshy land along the Neva River. This fortress served as the protective heart of the new settlement. At that time, Russia faced military threats, and the fortress was designed to defend the city and secure its strategic position near the Baltic Sea. In many ways, the fortress symbolized strength and the determination of Peter the Great to protect the new gateway he was opening for his nation. But within the walls of this powerful military structure stood something even more meaningful. At the center of the fortress, Peter the Great ordered the construction of the Peter and Paul Cathedral. This cathedral was dedicated to two of the most important apostles in Christian history, Saint Peter and Saint Paul, the Apostle. The dedication of the cathedral to these two apostles carried profound symbolism. Saint Peter represented the foundation and leadership of the church, the rock upon which Christ promised his church would stand. Saint Paul, on the other hand, was known as the great missionary who carried the message of Christianity far beyond its beginnings. Together, Peter and Paul symbolize both foundation and mission strength, within and outreach beyond. By placing a cathedral dedicated to these apostles at the heart of the fortress, Peter demonstrated that the city reflected deeper Christian ideals. The fortress protected the city physically, while the cathedral represented its spiritual foundation. This powerful combination revealed something about Peter the Great's vision for his new capital. He wanted the city to stand strong like a fortress, yet also to carry the cultural and spiritual heritage that had shaped Russia for centuries. The presence of the cathedral within the fortress reminded all that even a city built on ambition should remain connected to faith. Over time, the Peter and Paul Cathedral became one of the most important landmarks of St. Petersburg. Its tall golden spire rises high above the city skyline, serving as a constant reminder of the city's origins. The cathedral also became the burial place of many Russian emperors, linking the monarchy with the spiritual symbolism of the apostles. Thus, the construction of the Peter and Paul Fortress and its cathedral reveals a deeper story about the founding of St. Petersburg. The city was built to be powerful, but it was also designed to stand upon a foundation of history, faith, and symbolism. St. Petersburg was shaped not only by political ambition, but also by the enduring legacy of the Christian tradition. The figure of St. Peter has always carried deep meaning within Christian tradition. His life tells a powerful story of transformation. How an ordinary man, humble in background and limited in worldly power, was chosen by Christ to become one of the central pillars of the faith. Because of this remarkable journey, St. Peter came to represent several profound spiritual themes that continue to inspire believers even today. One of the most important symbols connected to St. Peter is that of the rock. In the Gospel, Jesus speaks words that have echoed through centuries. "You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church." These words gave Peter a special role as a foundation. The image of the rock suggests stability, strength, and endurance. A rock stands firm against storms and shifting tides. In the same way, Peter's faith and leadership were meant to support the church through challenges and trials. He became a figure of spiritual firmness. Another powerful symbol connected to St. Peter is that of the keeper of the keys. Tradition often depicts Peter holding keys. These keys symbolize authority, responsibility, guidance, and the duty to care for the community of believers. They reflect the idea that Peter was given a role of service, opening the path of faith and guiding others toward truth and salvation. This imagery of the keys became one of the most recognizable symbols of Peter's mission and leadership throughout history. Yet despite these honors, The story of Saint Peter begins in the most humble way. Before he was a leader, he was simply a fisherman. Living and working along the shores of Galilee, he spent his days casting nets and earning a modest living. His life changed completely when Jesus called him to leave his nets behind and follow him. This transformation made Peter a powerful symbol. From fisherman to apostle, his story reminds Christians that greatness in God's plan often begins in humility. These three images, the rock, the keys, and the fisherman, combine to form a portrait of Saint Peter that is both inspiring and deeply symbolic. He represents strength and stability, authority joined with responsibility, and the possibility of transformation through faith. It is precisely these meanings that make the connection between Saint Peter and the city of Saint Petersburg so significant. When Peter the Great founded the city in 1703, he was not simply establishing a new capital for political purposes. He was creating a symbol of a new future for Russia's city that would serve as a gateway to Europe and a center of culture. By naming the city after Saint Peter, Peter the Great connected the identity of the city to these deeper Christian themes. Just as the Apostle Peter represented the rock-like foundation of the church, the new city would become a strong foundation for Russia. Just as Peter was entrusted with keys of authority, the city would become a place of governance and responsibility within the empire. And just as Peter's life showed how humble beginnings could lead to destiny, the young city built in marshland would grow into a magnificent capital. In this way, the name Saint Petersburg carries far more meaning than a simple dedication. It reflects a vision where faith and ambition come together. The city was meant to stand strong like the rock of Peter, to exercise leadership like the keeper of the keys, and to rise from humble beginnings just as the fisherman once did when he answered Christ's call. The history of St. Petersburg is not only a story of grand palaces, canals, and imperial power. It is also a story written through changing names that reflect the dramatic political transformations Russia experienced over the centuries. Each name the city carried tells part of a larger historical narrative, revealing how wars, revolutions, and shifting ideologies reshaped the nation. When the city was first founded in 1703 by Peter the Great, it was given the name Saint Petersburg. The name honored Saint Peter, the patron saint of the emperor. It also reflected Peter the Great's admiration for Western Europe, as the name itself had a distinctly European sound. The city was meant to represent a new, outward-looking Russia, a window to the West where culture, science, and trade could flourish. For more than 2 centuries, St. Petersburg stood as the capital of the Russian Empire and one of the most magnificent cities in Europe. Its architecture, universities, and theaters made it a center of learning and artistic achievement. But in the early 20th century, the city's name would change for the first time due to the powerful forces of global conflict. In 1914, at the beginning of World War I, Russia found itself at war with Germany. Because the name St. Petersburg sounded German, many Russians felt it was no longer appropriate during a time of national struggle. To emphasize Russian identity and patriotism, the city was renamed. The new name kept the connection to Peter the Great, but used a more Slavic form that felt closer to the Russian language. Only a few years later, the city would witness some of the most dramatic events in modern history. In 1917, Russia was shaken by the Russian Revolution, which brought an end to the monarchy and led to the rise of the Soviet Union. After the death of Vladimir Lenin in 1924, the Soviet government renamed the city Leningrad in his honor. For many decades, the name Leningrad became closely associated with the Soviet era. During this time, the city played a crucial role in the nation's political, industrial, and cultural life. One of the most tragic yet heroic chapters occurred during the siege of Leningrad, when the city endured nearly 900 days of blockade. Despite immense suffering, the people of Leningrad demonstrated extraordinary courage and resilience. Yet history continued to move forward toward the end of the 20th century. The Soviet Union itself began to collapse. In 1991, as the Soviet system came to an end, the citizens voted in a referendum to restore its historic name. Once again, the city became St. Petersburg, reconnecting it with the legacy of its founder and the apostle. This return to the original name was more than a simple administrative change. It symbolized a reconnection with the city's deeper historical roots, its imperial past, and its cultural heritage. Through wars, revolutions, and political upheavals, the city's identity evolved many times. Yet after centuries of change, it ultimately returned to the name that had been chosen at its birth. Today, St. Petersburg stands as a powerful reminder that while history may reshape nations, certain names and symbols endure. The city links the present to the deeper stories of faith, culture, and human destiny. Today, St. Petersburg stands as one of the most magnificent and historically rich cities in the world. What began as an ambitious project in 1703, when Peter the Great laid its first foundations on marshy land along the Baltic coast, has grown into a city admired for its beauty, culture, and dramatic past. Over the centuries, St. Petersburg has transformed into a place where art, architecture, history, and faith come together. One of the most striking features of modern St. Petersburg is its grand palaces and world-class museums. The city was once the capital of the Russian Empire, and its rulers spared no effort in creating buildings that reflected power. Among the most famous of these is the magnificent Winter Palace, which once served as the residence of Russian emperors. Today, it forms part of the vast Hermitage Museum, home to millions of works of art from across centuries and civilizations. Visitors walking through its halls encounter masterpieces of painting and sculpture that reflect the city's long-standing connection to culture. Beyond its palaces and museums, St. Petersburg is equally celebrated for its elegant bridges and graceful canals. The city was carefully designed to resemble the great European capitals, admired by Peter the Great. Because of the many waterways that weave through it, St. Petersburg is often compared to Venice or Amsterdam. The Neva River and its branches divide the city into islands connected by dozens of beautifully designed bridges. Many of these bridges are engineering marvels that open at night to allow ships to pass, creating one of the most iconic and romantic sights in the city. Yet beneath the beauty of its architecture lies a deeper layer of meaning rooted in the city's rich Christian and imperial history. St. Petersburg was filled with churches and cathedrals reflecting the spiritual traditions of the Russian people. Nearby stands the Peter and Paul Fortress, the original stronghold from which the city began to grow. At the same time, St. Petersburg carries the memory of the Russian Empire, the political and cultural heart of the nation. Palaces, statues, and historic avenues tell the story of emperors, reformers, artists, and revolutionaries who shaped Russia's destiny. The city witnessed triumphs, tragedies, revolutions, and wars, each leaving its mark on its streets and monuments. Because of this extraordinary history, St. Petersburg is more than just a beautiful destination. It is a city that tells a story of vision, struggle, and resilience. It was born from a dream when Peter the Great imagined a new Russia open to the world. It was built through hardship, as workers battled harsh climates and difficult terrain to construct the city from marshland, and it has been shaped by centuries of dramatic history, surviving wars, revolutions, and political transformations. Today, visitors who walk along its canals or stand before its cathedrals experience more than architectural beauty. They encounter the living legacy of a city that has endured and evolved through time. For this reason, St. Petersburg remains one of the most breathtaking cities on Earth, a place where history, faith, and human ambition have come together to create something truly unforgettable. When Peter the Great decided to build the city of St. Petersburg in 1703, he chose a location that many thought was impossible. The land along the Neva River was harsh and unforgiving. Much of it was covered with swamps and marshes, where the ground was unstable. Winters were bitterly cold, and thick fog often rolled across the water. It seemed like the last place for a magnificent capital. Yet Peter was determined to turn this difficult landscape into something extraordinary. He believed Russia needed a new gateway to Europe. And so, despite the challenging environment, construction began. The early years were incredibly difficult for those who labored there. Thousands of workers were brought to the site and forced to labor in the mud in freezing weather. They dug canals and drained mud. Conditions were harsh, and the work required immense endurance. Slowly, however, the vision of Peter the Great began to take shape. What had once been swampy ground started to transform as canals replaced marshes and foundations rose from the muddy earth. As the city grew, stone structures began to appear where there had once been only water and reeds. Gradually, magnificent palaces and churches emerged, reflecting the power of the Russian Empire. Peter wanted this city to stand apart. His goal was to create a place that looked and felt like the great cities of Europe. He introduced wide avenues, elegant squares, and planned neighborhoods. Architects from across Europe were invited to design the West-inspired buildings, The city's many waterways were shaped into canals that wound through the streets, creating graceful reflections. Because of these canals and beauty, many visitors soon began comparing St. Petersburg to Venice. St. Petersburg developed its own network of rivers and canals, giving the city a distinctive and romantic atmosphere. What makes this story remarkable is the transformation itself. A place that once seemed uninhabitable was turned into a beautiful city through determination and sacrifice. The marshland was reshaped into a grand capital filled with palaces, cathedrals, and bridges. Today, when people walk along the elegant streets, it can be hard to imagine the difficult beginnings of the city. Yet beneath the beauty lies the memory of those early struggles and the powerful dream that drove its creation. From muddy swamps emerged a city that would become a symbol of resilience, an artistic Brooklyn city that continues to captivate the world. For more than 2 centuries, St. Petersburg stood as the proud capital of the Russian Empire, a magnificent city of palaces, grand cathedrals, and elegant canals. It was the center of imperial power, where emperors ruled, artists flourished, and political decisions shaped the destiny of one of the largest empires. But beneath the beauty and splendor of the city, powerful social and political tensions were slowly building. By the early 20th century, Russia was facing enormous challenges. Economic struggles, political unrest, and dissatisfaction among the people had been growing for years. The situation finally exploded in 1917 during the dramatic events of the Russian Revolution. The revolution changed the course of Russian history almost overnight. The centuries-old imperial system that had ruled the nation collapsed. The authority of the emperor disappeared, and the royal family that once lived in the grand palaces lost its power and position. In the midst of this upheaval, the once imperial capital became the stage for some of the most dramatic moments of the revolution. Crowds filled the streets. Soldiers changed sides, and political leaders struggled to control the rapidly unfolding events. The city that had once symbolized imperial strength now became the center of revolutionary change. As the new political order began to take shape, the identity of the city itself was transformed. The revolutionary movement that seized power was led by the Bolsheviks under the leadership of Vladimir Lenin. After Lenin's death in 1924, the Soviet government decided to honor him in a powerful symbolic way. The city was renamed Leningrad, replacing the historic name that had once been connected to Peter the Great and the Apostle Saint Peter. This new name reflected the values of the Soviet era, which emphasized revolutionary heroes rather than the imperial traditions of the past. For decades, the city was known as Leningrad. It became a central city of the Soviet Union, playing an important role in industry and culture. During this time, it witnessed both remarkable achievements and tremendous hardships, including the devastating siege of Leningrad, one of the most tragic chapters of World War II, when the city endured nearly 900 days of blockade but refused to surrender. Through all these years, the name Leningrad became deeply connected to the Soviet identity of the city. Yet beneath that name remained the memory of the older city, the one founded by Peter the Great, and inspired by the legacy of Saint Peter. Thus, the dramatic events of the Russian Revolution not only reshaped the government and society, but also changed the identity of one of its greatest cities. For many decades, the name Leningrad stood as a symbol of revolutionary change and Soviet power, marking a new chapter in the city's story. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, Russia entered a new era of political freedom and cultural revival. For the citizens of St. Petersburg, this was not only a time of national transformation, but also an opportunity to reclaim a vital part of their identity. In a historic referendum, the people voted to restore the city's original name, Saint Petersburg, returning to the designation given by Peter the Great. In 1703, the naming honored the Apostle Saint Peter, its original spiritual inspiration. This change was far more than a simple renaming. It marked a reconnection to centuries of history, culture, and religious symbolism. It was a legacy that had been overshadowed during the Soviet era. By reclaiming its original name, the city re-established its link to its founding ideals, vision, and resilience, and celebrated the legacy of Peter the Great's dream. A city open to Europe, a center of learning, art, and innovation. A place that could endure through the harshest trials. Modern St. Petersburg now shines as a city of breathtaking beauty, where grand palaces and elegant bridges coexist. Intricate canals coexist with rich historical monuments and religious landmarks. Its story, from humble beginnings on swampy land, through imperial glory, revolutionary upheaval, and eventual revival, makes it a living testament to the perseverance and spirit of its people. Today, St. Petersburg stands as a center of culture and history, a symbol of resilience, identity, and continuity through the ages. It has survived political turmoil, wars, and social upheavals, yet remains steadfastly proud of its roots. In every street and cathedral, the echoes of its founders and the generations who shaped its destiny are still felt. St. Petersburg is a city where the past and present merge in unforgettable splendor. Its restored name reminds the world of the enduring power of heritage, faith, and the vision of those who built it. And there you have it, the incredible story of St. Petersburg, a city born from the vision of Peter the Great, inspired by St. Peter the Apostle, and shaped through centuries of triumphs, struggles, and resilience. From its swampy, frozen beginnings to its grand palaces, elegant canals, and enduring cultural legacy, St. Petersburg stands as a symbol of faith, perseverance, and the power of human vision guided by divine inspiration. Its name, lost and reclaimed through revolutions and political upheavals, reminds us of the enduring connection between history, spirituality, and the identity of a people. If you found this story fascinating, there are countless more tales of faith, courage, and divine inspiration waiting for you. Join our community at Stories of the Saints, where we dive deep into the lives of saints and the miracles they performed, and the lessons their journeys hold for us today. Hit that subscribe button and be part of a journey through history, spirituality, and the extraordinary lives that continue to inspire generations. Every story brings you closer to understanding the incredible ways in which faith and vision shape our world. Stay with us for more amazing stories, and let the lives of saints and their timeless legacies inspire your own path.